Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliette Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. News stories are posted every month on the second Sunday at 2:30 p.m. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube page or following our Facebook. As a reminder, some stories contain adult language and content. It is recommended you review stories before allowing younger audiences to listen. This is Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff. Anders couldn't get to the bank until just before it closed. So of course the line was endless, and he got stuck behind two women whose loud, stupid conversation put him in a murderous temper. He was never in the best of tempers anyway. Anders, a book critic known for the weary, elegant savagery with which he dispatched almost everything he reviewed. With the line still doubled around the rope, one of the tellers stuck a "position closed" sign in her window and walked to the back of the bank, where she leaned against a desk and began to pass the time with a man shuffling papers. The women in front of Anders broke off their conversation and watched the teller with hatred. "Oh, that's nice," one of them said. She turned to Anders and added, confident of his accord, "One of those little human touches that keep us coming back for more." Anders had conceived his own towering hatred of the teller, but he immediately turned it on the presumptuous crybaby in front of him. "Damned unfair," he said. "Tragic, really. If they're not chopping off the wrong leg or bombing your ancestral village, they're closing their positions." She stood her ground. "I didn't say it was tragic," she said. "I just think it's a pretty lousy way to treat your customers." "Unforgivable," Anders said. "Heaven will take note." She sucked in her cheeks, but stared past him and said nothing. Anders saw that the other woman, her friend, was looking in the same direction, and then the tellers stopped what they were doing, and the customers slowly turned back, and silence came over the bank. Two men wearing black ski masks and blue business suits were standing to the side of the door. One of them had a pistol pressed against the guard's neck. The guard's eyes were closed, and his lips were moving. The other man had a sawed-off shotgun. "Keep your big mouth shut," the man with the pistol said, though no one had spoken a word. "One of you tellers hits the alarm, you're all dead meat. Got it?" The tellers nodded. "Oh, bravo," Anders said. "Dead meat." He turned to the woman in front of him. "Great script, eh? The stern, brass-knuckled poetry of the dangerous classes." She looked at him with drowning eyes. The man with the shotgun pushed the guard to his knees. He handed the shotgun to his partner and yanked the guard's wrists up behind his back and locked them together with a pair of handcuffs. He toppled him onto the floor with a kick between the shoulder blades. Then he took his shotgun back and went over to the security gate at the end of the counter. He was short and heavy and moved with peculiar slowness, even torpor. "Buzz him in," his partner said. The man with the shotgun opened the gate and sauntered along the line of tellers, handing each of them a hefty bag. When he came to the empty position, he looked over at the man with the pistol, who said, "Whose slot is that?" Anders watched the teller. She put her hand to her throat and turned to the man she'd been talking to. He nodded. Mine?" she said. "Then get your ugly ass in gear and fill the bag." "There you go," Anders said to the woman in front of him. "Justice is done." "Hey, bright boy, did I tell you to talk?" "No," Anders said. "Then shut your trap." "Did you hear that?" Anders said. "Bright boy. Right out of the killers." "Please be quiet," the woman said. "Hey, you deaf or what?" The man with the pistol walked over to Anders. He poked the weapon into Anders' gut. "You think I'm playing games?" "No," Anders said. But the barrel tickled like a stiff finger, and he had to fight back the titters. He did this by making himself stare into the man's eyes, which were clearly visible behind the holes in the mask, pale blue and rawly red-rimmed. The man's left eyelid kept twitching. He breathed out a piercing ammoniac smell that shocked Anders more than anything that had happened, and he was beginning to develop a sense of unease when the man prodded him again with the pistol. "You like me, bright boy?" he said. "You want to suck my dick?" "No," Anders said. "Then stop looking at me." Anders fixed his gaze on the man's shiny wingtip shoes. "Not down there. Up here." He stuck the pistol under Anders' chin and pushed it upward until Anders was looking at the ceiling. Anders had never paid much attention to that part of the bank, a pompous old building with marble floors and counters and pillars and gilt scrollwork over the tellers' cages. The domed ceiling had been decorated with mythological figures whose fleshy, toga-draped ugliness Anders had taken in at a glance many years earlier and afterward declined to notice. Now he had no choice but to scrutinize the painter's work. It was even worse than he remembered, and all of it executed with the utmost gravity. The artist had a few tricks up his sleeve and used them again and again. A certain rosy blush on the underside of the clouds, a coy backward glance on the faces of the cupids and fawns. The ceiling was crowded with various dramas, but the one that caught Anders' eye was Zeus and Europa portrayed in this rendition as a bull ogling a cow from behind a haystack. To make the cow sexy, the painter had canted her hips suggestively and given her long, droopy eyelashes, through which she gazed back at the bull with sultry welcome. The bull wore a smirk, and his eyebrows were arched. If there'd been a bubble coming out of his mouth, it would have said, "Hubba hubba." "What's so funny, bright boy?" "Nothing." "You think I'm comical? You think I'm some kind of clown?" "No." "You think you can fuck with me?" "No." "Fuck with me again in your history, capiche?" Anders burst out laughing. He covered his mouth with both hands and said, "I'm sorry," then snorted helplessly through his fingers and said, "Capiche? Oh God, capiche?" And at that, the man with the pistol raised the pistol and shot Anders right in the head. The bullet smashed Anders' skull and plowed through his brain and exited behind his right ear, scattering shards of bone into the cerebral cortex, the corpus callosum, back toward the basal ganglia, and down into the thalamus. But before all this occurred, the first appearance of the bullet in the cerebrum set off a crackling chain of ion transports and neurotransmissions. Because of their peculiar origin, these traced a peculiar pattern, flukishly calling to life a summer afternoon some 40 years past, and long since lost to memory. After striking the cranium, the bullet was moving at 900 feet per second, a pathetically sluggish glacial pace compared to the synaptic lightning that flashed around it. Once in the brain, that is, the bullet came under the mediation of brain time, which gave Anders plenty of leisure to contemplate the scene that, in a phrase he would have abhorred, passed before his eyes. It is worth noting that Anders did not remember, given what he did remember. He did not remember his first lover, Sherry, or what he had most madly loved about her before it came to irritate him. Her unembarrassed carnality, and especially the cordial way she had with his unit, which she called Mr. Mole, as in, "Uh-oh, looks like Mr. Mole wants to play, and let's hide Mr. Mole." Anders did not remember his wife, whom he had also loved before she exhausted him with her predictability, or his daughter, now a solemn professor of economics at Dartmouth. He did not remember standing just outside his daughter's door as she lectured her bear about his naughtiness and described the truly appalling punishments Paws would receive unless he changed his ways. He did not remember a single line of the hundreds of poems he had committed to memory in his youth so that he could give himself the shivers at will, not "Silent upon a peak in Darien," or "My God, I heard this day," or "All my pretty ones, did you say all? Oh, hell kite all?" None of these did he remember, not one. Anders did not remember his dying mother saying of his father, "I should have stabbed him in his sleep." He did not remember Professor Joseph's telling his class how Athenian prisoners in Sicily had been released if they could recite Aeschylus, and then reciting Aeschylus himself right there in the Greek. Anders did not remember how his eyes had burned at those sounds. He did not remember the surprise of seeing a college classmate's name on the jacket of a novel not long after they graduated, or the respect he had felt after reading the book. He did not remember the pleasure of giving respect. Nor did Anders remember seeing a woman leap to her death from the building opposite his own, just days after his daughter was born. He did not remember shouting, "Lord, have mercy!" He did not remember deliberately crashing his father's car into a tree, or having his ribs kicked in by 3 policemen in an anti-war rally, or waking himself up with laughter. He did not remember when he began to regard the heaps of books on his desk with boredom and dread, or when he grew angry at writers for writing them. He did not remember when everything began to remind him of something else. This is what he remembered. Heat, a baseball field, yellow grass, the whir of insects, himself leaning against a tree as the boys of the neighborhood gather for a pickup game. He looks on as the others argue with the relative genius of Mantle and Mays. They have been worrying this subject all summer, and it has become tedious to Anders, an oppression like the heat. Then the last two boys arrive, Coyle and a cousin of his from Mississippi. Anders has never met Coyle's cousin before, and will never see him again. He says hi with the rest, but takes no further notice of him until they've chosen sides, and someone asks the cousin what position he wants to play. Shortstop, the boy says. Short's the best position they is. Anders turns and looks at him. He wants to hear Coyle's cousin repeat what he's just said, but he knows better than to ask. The others will think he's being a jerk, ragging the kid for his grammar. But that isn't it. Not at all. It's that Anders is strangely roused, elated by those final two words, their pure unexpectedness and their music. He takes the field in a trance, repeating them to himself. The bullet is already in the brain. It won't be outrun forever or charmed to a halt. In the end, it will do its work and leave the troubled skull behind, dragging its comet tail of memory and hope and talent and love into the marble hall of commerce. That can't be helped. But for now, Anders can still make time. Time for the shadows to lengthen on the grass. Time for the tethered dog to bark at the flying ball. Time for the boy in the right field to smack his sweat-blackened mitt and softly chant, "They is. They is, they is, they is." The New York Times at Special Bargain Rates by Stephen King. She's fresh out of the shower when the phone begins to ring. But although the house is still full of relatives, she can hear them downstairs, and it seems they will never go away. It seems she never had so many. No one picks up. Nor does the answering machine, as James programmed it to do after the fifth ring. Anne goes to the extension on the bed table, wrapping a towel around her, her wet hair thwacking unpleasantly on the back of her neck and bare shoulders. She picks it up. She says hello, and then he says her name. It's James. They had 30 years together, and one word is all she needs. He says Annie like no one else. Always did. For a moment she can't speak or even breathe. He has caught her on the exhale, and her lungs feel as flat as sheets of paper. Then, as he says her name again, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant and unsure of himself, the strength slips from her legs. They turn to sand, and she sits on the bed, the towel falling off her, her wet bottom dampening the sheet beneath her. If the bed hadn't been there, she would have gone to the floor. Her teeth click together, and that starts her breathing again. "James, where are you? What happened?" In her normal voice, this might have come out sounding shrewish. A mother scolding her wayward 11-year-old who's come late to the supper table yet again. But now it emerges in a kind of horrified growl. The murmuring relatives below her are, after all, planning his funeral. James chuckles. It is a bewildered sound. "Well, I tell you what," he says, "I don't exactly know where I am." Her first confused thought is that he must have missed the plane in London, even though he called her from Heathrow not long before it took off. Then a clearer idea comes. Although both the Times and the TV news say were no survivors, there was at least one. Her husband crawled from the wreckage of the burning plane and the burning apartment building the plane hit. Don't forget that. 24 more dead on the ground, and the number apt to rise before the world moved on to the next tragedy. And has been wandering around Brooklyn ever since in a state of shock. "Jimmy, are you all right? Are you burned?" The truth of what that would mean occurs after the question, thumping down with the heavy weight of a dropped book on a bare foot, and she begins to cry. Are you in the hospital?" "Hush," he says, and at his old kindness, and at that old word, just one small piece of their marriage's furniture, she begins to cry harder. Honey, hush. But I don't understand. I'm all right, he says. Most of us are. Most? There are others? Not the pilot, he says. He's not so good. Or maybe it's the co-pilot. He keeps screaming, we're going down! There's no power! Oh my god! Also, this isn't my fault. Don't let them blame it on me. He says that too. She's cold all over. Who is this really? Why are you being so horrible? I just lost my husband, you asshole! Honey, don't call me that. There's a clear strand of mucus hanging from one of her nostrils. She wipes it away with the back of her hand, and then flings it into the wherever, a thing she hasn't done since she was a child. Listen, mister, I'm going to star 69 this call, and the police will come and slam your ass, your ignorant, unfeeling ass. But she can go no further. It's his voice. There's no denying it. The way the call rang right through, no pickup downstairs, no answering machine, suggests this call was just for her. And, honey, hush, like in the old Carl Perkins song. He has remained quiet, as if letting her work these things through for herself. But before she can speak again, there's a beep on the line. James? Jimmy? Are you still there? Yeah, but I can't talk long. I was trying to call you when we went down, and I guess that's the only reason I was able to get through at all. Lots of others have been trying. We're lousy with cell phones, but no luck. The beep again. Only, now my phone's almost out of juice. Jimmy, did you know? This idea has been the hardest and most terrible part for her, that he might have known, if only for an endless minute or two. Others might picture burned bodies or dismembered heads with grinning teeth, even light-fingered first responders filching wedding rings and diamond ear clips. But what has robbed Annie Driscoll's sleep is the image of Jimmy looking out his window as the streets and cars and the brown apartment buildings of Brooklyn swell closer. The useless masks flopping down like the corpses of small yellow animals. The overhead bins popping open, carry-ons starting to fly, someone's Norelco razor rolling up the tilted aisle. Did you know you were going down? Not really, he says. Everything seemed all right until the very end. Maybe the last 30 seconds? Although it's hard to keep track of time in situations like that, I always think. Situations like that. And even more telling, I always think, as if he has been aboard half a dozen crashing 767s instead of just the one. In any case, he goes on, I was just calling to say we'd be early, so be sure to get the FedEx man out of bed before I get there. Her absurd attraction for the FedEx man has been a joke between them for years. She begins to cry again. His cell utters another of those beeps, as if scolding her for it. I think I died just a second or two before it rang the first time. I think that's why I was able to get through to you. But this thing's gonna give up the ghost pretty soon. He chuckles as if this is funny. She supposes that in a way it is. She may see the humor in it herself eventually. Give me 10 or so years, she thinks. Then, in that just talking to myself voice she knows so well, why didn't I put the tiresome motherfucker on charge last night? Just forgot, that's all. Just forgot. James, honey, the plane crashed 2 days ago. A pause. Mercifully, with no beeps to fill it. Then, really? Mrs. Corey said time was funny here. Some of us agreed. Some of us disagreed. It was a disagreeer. But looks like she was right. Hearts? Annie asks. She feels now as if she is floating outside and slightly above her plump, damp, middle-aged body. But she hasn't forgotten Jimmy's old habits. On a long flight, he was always looking for a game. Cribbage or canasta would do, but hearts was his true love. Hearts, he agrees. The phone beeps again as if seconding that. Jimmy. She hesitates long enough to ask herself if this is information she really wants, then plunges with the question still unanswered. Where are you, exactly? Looks like Grand Central Station, he says, only bigger and emptier, as if it wasn't really Grand Central at all, but only, a movie set of Grand Central? Do you know what I'm trying to say? I think so. There certainly aren't any trains, and we can't hear any in the distance, but there are doors going everywhere. Oh, and there's an escalator, but it's broken, all dusty, and some of the treads are broken. He pauses, and when he speaks again, he does so in a lower voice, as if afraid of being overheard. People are leaving. Some climb the escalator, I saw them, but most are using the doors. I guess I'll have to leave too. For one thing, there's nothing to eat. There's a candy machine, but that's broken too. Honey, are you hungry? A little. Mostly what I'd like is some water. I'd kill for a cold bottle of Dasani. Annie looks guiltily down at her own legs, still beaded with water. She imagines him licking off those beads and is horrified to feel a sexual stirring. I'm all right, though, he adds hastily. For now, anyway. But there's no sense staying here, only... What? What, Jimmy? I don't know which door to use. Another beep. I wish I knew which one Mrs. Corey took. She's got my damn cards. Are you... She wipes her face with the towel she wore out of the shower. Then she was fresh. Now she's all tears and snot. Are you scared? Scared? He asked thoughtfully. No, a little worried, that's all. Mostly about which door to use. Find your way home, she almost says. Find the right door, and find your way home. But if he did, would she want to see him? A ghost might be all right, but what if she opened the door on a smoking cinder with red eyes and the remains of jeans? He always traveled in jeans, melted into his legs. And what if Mrs. Corey was with him, his baked deck of cards in one twisted hand? Beep. I don't need to tell you to be careful about the FedEx man anymore, he says. If you really want him, he's all yours. She shocks herself by laughing. But I did want to say, I love you. Oh, honey, I love you too. And not to let the McCormick kid do the gutters this fall. He works hard, but he's a risk taker. Last year, he almost broke his fucking neck. And don't go to the bakery anymore on Sundays. Something's gonna happen there, and I know it's going to be on a Sunday, but I don't know which Sunday. Time really is funny here. The McCormick kid he's talking about must be the son of the guy who used to be their caretaker in Vermont. Only they sold that place 10 years ago, and the kid must be in his mid-20s by now. And the bakery? She supposes he's talking about Zoltan's, but what on earth? Beep. Some of the people here were on the ground, I guess. That's very tough because they don't have a clue how they got here. And the pilot keeps screaming, or maybe it's the co-pilot. I think he's going to be here for quite a while. He just wanders around. He's very confused. The beeps are coming closer together now. I have to go, Annie. I can't stay here, and the phone's going to shit the bed any second now. Anyway. Once more in the I'm scolding myself voice. Impossible to believe that she will never hear it again after today. Impossible not to believe, he mutters. It would have been so simple just... Well, never mind. I love you, sweetheart. Wait, don't go. I can't... I love you too. Don't go. But he already has. In her ear, there is only black silence. She sits there with the dead phone to her ear for a minute or more, then breaks the connection. The non-connection. When she opens the line again and gets a perfectly normal dial tone, she touches star 69 after all. According to the robot who answers her page, the last incoming call was at 9 o'clock that morning. She knows who that one was, her sister Nell calling from New Mexico. Nell called to tell Annie that her plane had been delayed and she wouldn't be in until tonight. Nell told her to be strong. All the relatives who live at a distance, James's, Annie's, flew in. Apparently they feel that James used up all the family's destruction points, at least for the time being. There is no record of an incoming call she glances at the bedside clock and sees it's now 3:17 p.m. At about 10 past 3 on the third afternoon of her widowhood. Someone raps briefly on the door and her brother calls, Annie? Annie? Dressing? She calls back. Her voice sounds like she's been crying, but unfortunately, no one in this house would find that strange. Privacy, please, You okay?" he calls through the door. "We thought you heard... we thought we heard you talking." And Ellie thought she heard you call out. "Fine," she calls, then wipes her face again with the towel. "Down in a few." "Okay, take your time. We're here for you." Then he clumps away. "Beep," she whispers, then covers her mouth to hold in laughter that is some emotion even more complicated than grief, finding the only way out it has. Beep, 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 beep. She lies back on the bed, laughing, and above her cupped hands, her eyes are large and awash with tears that overspill down her cheeks and run all the way to her ears. Beep fucking beepity beep. She laughs for quite a while, then dresses and goes downstairs to be with her relatives, who have come to share their grief with hers. Only they feel apart from her, because he didn't call any of them. He called her. For better or worse, he called her. During the autumn of that year, with the blackened remains of the apartment building the jet crashed into still closed off from the rest of the world by yellow police tape, although the taggers have been inside, one leaving a spray-painted message reading, "Crispy critters, stop here," Annie receives the sort of e-blast computer addicts like to send to a wide circle of acquaintances. This one comes from Gert Fisher, the town librarian in Tilton, Vermont. When Annie and James summered there, Annie used to volunteer at the library, and although the two women never got on especially well, Gert has included Annie in her quarterly updates ever since. They're usually not very interesting, but halfway through the weddings, funerals, and 4-H winners in this one, Annie comes across a bit of news that makes her catch her breath. Jason McCormick, the son of old Huey McCormick, was killed in an accident on Labor Day. He fell from the roof of a summer cottage while cleaning the gutters and broke his neck. He was only doing a favor for his dad, who, as you may remember, had a stroke the year before last, Gert wrote before going on to how it rained on the library's end of summer lawn sale and how disappointed they all were. Gert doesn't say in her 3-page compendium of breaking news, but Annie is quite sure Jason fell from the roof of what used to be their cottage. In fact, she is positive. 5 years after the death of her husband and the death of Jason McCormick not long after, Annie remarries. And although they relocate to Boca Raton, she gets back to the old neighborhood often. Craig, the new husband, is only semi-retired, and his business takes him to New York every 3 or 4 months. Annie almost always goes with him, because she still has family in Brooklyn and on Long Island. More than she knows what to do with, it sometimes seems. But she loves them with that exasperated affection that seems to belong, she thinks, only to people in their 50s and 60s. She never forgets how they drew together for her after James's plane went down, and made the best cushion for her that they could, so she wouldn't crash too. When she and Craig go back to New York, they fly. About this she never has a qualm, but she stops going to Zoltan's family bakery on Sundays when she's home, even though their raisin bagels are, she is sure, served in heaven's waiting room. She goes to Froger's instead. She is actually there buying donuts. The donuts are at least passable. When she hears the blast, she hears it clearly, even though Zoltan's is 11 blocks away. Large propane gas explosion. 4 killed, including the woman who always passed Annie her bagels with the top of the bag rolled down, saying, "Keep it that way until you get home or you lose the freshness." People stand on the sidewalks, looking east toward the sound of the explosion and the rising smoke, shading their eyes with their hands. Annie hurries past them, not looking. She doesn't want to see a plume of smoke rising after a big bang. She thinks of James enough as it is, especially on the nights when she can't sleep. When she gets home, she can hear the phone ringing inside. Either everyone has gone down the block to where the local school is having a sidewalk art sale, or no one can hear that ringing phone. Except for her, that is. And by the time she gets her key turned in the lock, the ringing has stopped. Sarah, the only one of her sisters who never married, is there, it turns out, but there is no need to ask her why she didn't answer the phone. Sarah Bernecki, the one-time disco queen, is in the kitchen with the village people turned up, dancing around with the cedar in one hand, looking like a chick in a TV ad. She missed the bakery explosion too, although their building is even closer to Zoltan's than Froger's. Annie checks the answering machine, but there's a big red 0 in the messages waiting window. That means nothing in itself. Lots of people call without leaving a message. But star 69 reports the last call at 8:40 last night. Annie dials it anyway, hoping against hope that somewhere outside the big room that looks like a Grand Central Station movie set, he found a place to recharge his phone. To him, it might seem like he last spoke to her yesterday, or only minutes ago. "Time is funny here," he said. She has dreamed of that call so many times it now almost seems like a dream itself. But she has never told anyone about it. Not Craig. Not even her own mother, now almost 90, but alert with a firmly held belief in the afterlife. In the kitchen, the village people advise that there is no need to feel down. There isn't, and she doesn't. She nevertheless holds the phone very tightly as the number she has star 69 rings once, then twice. Annie stands in the living room with the phone to her ear and her free hand touching the brooch above her left breast, as if touching the brooch could still the pounding heart beneath it. Then the ringing stops, and a recorded voice offers to sell her the New York Times at special bargain rates that will not be repeated.